This is kind of big overview of the renal system. Kidneys, renal arteries. Coming off the top of this, you're going to have one that goes to the adrenal gland, the suprarenal artery, or what is it called? Also called the artery to the adrenal gland. Okay, so here's the abdominal aorta coming down, and you're going to have some branches off of it that you've already seen before, the celiac, superior mesenteric, and inferior mesenteric. Here's the split, bilaterally for the common iliac arteries. Here's the inferior vena cava coming up. Obviously, this is return blood from the kidneys. We'll see the kidneys in detail here in a second. One thing you can see here is the adrenal gland sitting on top of it. So these are kidneys. This is the right ureter. Ureter is going to come in here and empty into the bladder. This is the bladder. This is the trigone of the bladder right here, this triangular shaped portion here. You can see more rugae inside of the bladder. This is the detrusor muscle, which is 3 layers of muscles in different directions. That's called the detrusor, and we use that to kind of empty our bladder. Coming out here is the urethra. This is the prostate, this purple, so this is obviously a male. So prostatic urethra is this portion here. Okay. There's a little valve right here called the internal urethral valve, and so it sits right between these two right there. Okay. As we move over to the kidney itself, kind of from the larger view, so here's that renal artery we saw coming in. It's going to give branches off what's called the segmental arteries. Segmental arteries come into these interlobar arteries. They're going to go across the top, make these arcuate. Arcuates are going to give off these branches that radiate off the radiate branches. The radiate branches, if you look really close, end up in these little white guys. These are the glomerular capsules. So there's tons and tons and tons of these glomerular capsules. The capsules are going to feed into the proximal and distal convoluted tubules, empty eventually into these collecting ducts, into the papillary ducts, eventually into the minor calyx, to the major calyx, to the renal pelvis, and the renal pelvis out to the ureters, and then back down to the bladder itself. So let's have a look. Going to have these things called the pyramids, right? Right here, these are the renal pyramids. In between the pyramids, it's tough to see maybe on this. Here's a good one. Are these columns right here? These are called the renal columns. They separate the different pyramids. All right. Here's a good look at the arcuate fibers. Okay. One other thing I want to say here is the cortex is this portion up here. Okay. The medulla is this darker colored center section. Like all things, like we saw in brain, the cortex is the outside, the medulla is on the inside. That's kind of the usual nomenclature. This is a close-up of all of this. So you can pick one, but let's say this. This one is a cortical nephron. Can you see that it stays mostly up in the cortex? This one is the juxtaglomerular nephron. You can see how deep it goes into the medulla, whereas this one stays mostly up in the cortex. Most of them are this, like 85%. But let's just pick one and kind of follow it along. So here comes off that arcuate to the radiate. Radiate artery goes to this glomerular capsule. Inside the capsule, we're filtering the blood. We take the filtrate and we run it through this system that's in white. Okay, so this part that's all convoluted here that's near the capsule, it's called the proximal convoluted tubule. And it's proximal to this capsule, all these white things. So the proximal convoluted tubule goes to the descending tubule. There's thick and thin. Don't worry about that too much. Here's the thin, comes up, and now here's the thick, the ascending limb. Ascending limb is going to go to another convoluted tubule, but this one is a long way away from this as far as it's made this trip already. This is the distal convoluted tubule. Distal convoluted tubule is going to drop into these collecting ducts. Collecting ducts are going to come on down here into the papillary ducts, and this will be the papillary duct. And as we said a minute ago, papillary duct will empty into the minor calyx, which empties into the major calyx. which empties into the renal pelvis, which empties into the ureter, which empties into the bladder itself, which empties out the ureter, to wherever it's going. This is a close-up of the glomerular capsule itself. So, this is incoming. So this is the afferent tubule. This is the efferent tubule. If I go back here real quick, if you notice, the distal convoluted tubule comes really close. On its swing back by, it comes really close to the capsule. That's what this is. This is the distal convoluted tubule. So, here comes my blood incoming. It has to pass some cells right here. Whoops. Has to pass some cells right here, the juxtaglomerular cells. There's some mesangial cells, not really shown well on this model. We'll see that. Anyway, it comes in here, and you're going to have these cells here called podocytes. And it's from the Latin word for feet, pods, and like a podiatrist, have these little feet or appendages. Kind of like you could hold your hands and make filtration slits. That's what these are, the filtration slits. Okay, that let the filtrate through. What happens is blood comes in, these guys filter it, let some of the fluid out, which is basically blood plasma. It fills up this circle, and now it's starting to go this way into the proximal convoluted tubule. So, like we saw over here, from the capsule, it goes into the proximal convoluted tubule. So here it is, comes in off the artery, gets filtered here. The red blood cells and the rest of it go here and go out the efferent tubule. But this comes in, the filtrate gets filtered, the filtrate goes in here, and now it goes through the kidneys, and the kidneys process it.